Hey there, everybody. How's it going? So, tonight we're on a little early. So, I'm not sure who's here because I can't see in the chat who's here. And we are minus Rob this evening. He is completing his move back to Florida. So, hopefully, within a week or so, you'll hear from him again and he'll be back on doing his show. It's possible that he'll pop in tonight and say hey, but I don't know. So I'm here and we're going to sit here and chit chat for a little while and just have a conversation about what you guys think makes a good tarot reader. And I'll ring in on my opinion on what I think makes a good tarot reader. And I don't know. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how things fly. For me, a good tarot reader is somebody who is accurate. Hey, Bruce. Hey, Deborah. How's it going? I'm glad you guys made it in. I thought I was going to be doing this all by my lonesome. So thank you. So I was just saying we're going to have a conversation about what we think makes a good tarot reader. I don't know, Bruce, you never really actually had a reading. Have you? And Deborah, have you ever had one? What do you think makes a good tarot reader? I was just going into how I thought accuracy was part of it, but also I was getting ready to say connection and the ability to not only know what the cards mean, but to be able to interpret them in the context in which the question was asked or that you were speaking, or even intuitively. Sometimes you see a card and you know it means one thing, but you get that message that, well, it may mean this one thing, but truly for this representation, it means this, or something different. And I, for me, it also, the style in which people do it is very important to me too. Some people like rainbows and sparkles, and I like very direct, very to the point, succinct. I don't like people to beat around the bush or lay crumbs for me to follow. Like, just say what you mean and mean what you say. And so for me, that makes a good tarot reader, right? I want them to be truthful. I want them to deliver any messages that they get. I want them to be very, straight on, and, but they have to have a good attitude. Like, I don't know about you, Deborah, but for me, if I don't connect with that reader, like if something about them rubs me wrong, I typically, my readings are not very, I feel like I don't get, they're not on point. They're reading. If they're reading for me and I'm not connecting with them, often the reading is not on point. And I feel like maybe there's a misfire there somewhere. But which, kind of leads to the next question of, can your reading feel good but be inaccurate? And I feel like if you're delivering an inaccurate reading to somebody, or you're receiving an inaccurate reading from somebody, I don't know that it's a good reading. So, in that context, what do you mean by good? Is the reader, knowledgeable? Are they able to interpret the cards intelligently and get the point across, even though it's not resonating with you or it's not hitting home. Does that still make it a good reading? As somebody who's receiving the reading and paying for the reading, I'm thinking no. I mean, I can appreciate their style, their education, whatever, their knowledge, but, and I can appreciate maybe even the way that they're reading the cards, but I would not consider that a good reading, you know. Uh, but and conversely, can you get an uncomfortable reading and it's still be a good reading or a truthful reading? And so on that, I will say yeah, because I've sat and been told things that I didn't necessarily want to hear, but I needed to hear, um, and they were resonating. They hit home. They were on point. You know, I didn't really have to like the message, but just because I didn't like what was being said to me doesn't mean that it wasn't accurate or truthful, or the message wasn't meant for me. So it's an interesting dynamic, right? When we think about these things and what we think, a good tarot reading is. Some people like the fanfare, the show, you know, um, the woo-woo stuff, and the smoke rising and the dim lights and the candles lit. People go there for that ambiance, um, and setting the scene. And I think there needs to be. I mean, I think if that's your thing, then people who go to you, that's what they're part of what they're looking for. Um, I do not need somebody to have bells and whistles and crystals and candles, and I just need their energy to feel good, to be clear, um, and I need to feel comfortable in their presence in order to be able to sit down and feel like I'm getting a good reading. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? I mean, what are your opinions on something like that? I'll let you guys type in. I know it takes a minute. So Bruce is saying a good reader uh, is engaging and resonates. Um, yeah, I agree with that. Accuracy and connection, Deborah says. So I agree with that too. Um, I mean, the other questions are, how do you prefer your readings? What do you do? Like, so when people are flipping cards for me, I look at the cards and I know what they mean when they turn over, right? Or I have a general, like I basically can say, okay, well, I can kind of tell the story. Now, no two card readers are going to read, and we've demonstrated this, Rob and I, all the time. We flip cards and we don't necessarily read them exactly the same way. But, you know, a lot of the times there are just readers who read strictly on the meaning of the cards, and there's no interpretation or intuition involved. And I guess you could have a good reading that way, but I feel like it might be very dry. I always feel good or better, not good, but I always feel better when I'm giving a reading to somebody and I connect in their energy and I know, I'm saying this to you definitively based on the card in front of me and intuitively based on the energy that we're sharing. And vice versa. If I'm being read for, I want that connection and that feeling also. Um, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what you guys feel about that. Hey, Cynthia, thanks for joining. We're talking about what we think makes a good tarot reader. Um, uh, some of the things we were talked about, was it accuracy? Was it connection? Was it a combination of both? Is it, you know, does it make them a good reader because they've got the bells and the whistles, the candles, the incense, the sage? What constitutes a good reader for you? And we were also talking about, how do you prefer your reading? Do you prefer it where the reader is just strictly interpreting based off the textbook meaning of the cards, or do you prefer your readings to be, like a mixture of that and maybe some intuition, um, a little more intuitive? So I was just saying that I feel like I like a reader who can look at the card, suss out what the meaning of it is in the context of what the question was or the reading is, but also be able to intuitively cue in and say, for you specifically, based on the energy that I'm feeling, XYZ. Yeah, so Cynthia says intuitively she prefers her card readings rather than, that textbook, well, this is the Three of Swords, so, there's a heartbreak, or you're getting over a heartbreak. You want to be able to say, well, this Three of Swords came up because X, Y, and Z is happening in your world. I can feel it in your energy or whatever. Yeah, I'm the same way. I think that, connection with with the person giving the reading and getting the reading is very, very important. I know when I'm reading for somebody and I can't establish like a good energetic connection with them, I always feel like the reading is not as good as it should be or could be. Um, I always feel like, I feel like, is any of this making sense to you? Because I'll say things and I don't know, I don't know anything about the person in front of me really. And, sometimes it's good for that person to be like, oh yeah, I understand that. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Or yeah, I get it. And I don't need them to expound. I don't need them to tell me their life story or anything like that. But I do need them to say, well, yeah, you're on the right course. You're heading in the right direction. Um, and I try when people are reading for me to say, yeah, no, that makes sense. Or, here's what's happening, why this makes sense. Or, wow, that's wild or incredible because X, Y, or Z. And, I, I tend to, you know, my readings really are very energetically connected most of the time. So when I'm flipping cards, I can say, I can see, that there's a story unfolding, you know. So what's everybody's opinion on stuff like that? Like, how do you, like, what would be a terrible reading? What would be just like an awful reading? A good example was Bruce and I were in New Orleans a couple of months ago, and there was this chick on the street. I always like to stop when the street people are. Yeah, I like mine to be a conversation too, Cynthia. I like people to ask me questions. I like to ask people questions. But she was there, and I always try to stop one of these, people sitting like in their lawn chair on the corner to see what they have to say. And so Bruce and I stopped, and she mentioned something to Bruce that was pretty on point about a friend that had just passed. But the stuff she was saying to me didn't make sense to me. And uh and I just kind of was like, well, wait, okay. I just, but it's hit or miss when you sit down with the people, you know, given those readings, like, and they're out like on the side of the street in New Orleans. If you've ever been in New Orleans, you'll understand what I mean. Some people you'll get are just awesome, and some people you get are just terrible. I think some of the worst readings I've gotten were in New Orleans, street vendors. But then again, some of the best readings I've got, were street vendors. Let's see. Cynthia says she's never used a street reader. I always do it just one, because sometimes you're pleasantly surprised by the information and the reading you get, and two, people make money, and I don't mind, buying somebody's dinner one night, especially if they're out there trying to do something to make a little cash. And Deborah, I think if it's a reader is vague and only goes so far and wants more money, yeah, I agree with you there. I agree with that 100%. Where they're like, oh, you got a curse on you, so now let's walk over to my shelf of stuff, and I'm going to sell you my hex breaking oil and my, sage soap and my special, cleansing bath or whatever. I'm not saying those things are terrible, but and people don't need to use them, because they aren't, and people do. My point is, you don't want to feel like, uh, every time I think of this, I think of the movie Ghost, when Whoopi Goldberg is giving all those fake readings out, and then all of a sudden, like, she really can hear and see the people, but she's giving out those fake readings, and she's saying like this wild stuff. I always think of that, and she's just saying whatever she thinks she should say to get it, to get the people to come back or to pay. Cynthia had a reading by somebody named Bobby Drennan. I guess that person has passed away. I've never heard of them, Cynthia. Sorry. But then, stuff like that, though, it graduates into like your ethics, and how much of it, where do your ethics lie? And, Rob and I have talked about stuff like that every now and then. Like, hey, Rob won't read a third party. So if somebody comes on and says, how does so-and-so feel about me? Or will so-and-so ask me to marry them? He won't do that reading, because he feels like he's encroaching in somebody's energy who hasn't consented to the reading. Ethically, he won't do that. He won't, and I understand where he's coming from. I think it depends on who I'm reading for, whether or not I'll try and delve into information. But I typically don't like to pull information about people who don't know that I'm sort of swimming in their energetic pool, right? Where I'm flipping cards or whatever. And then giving that information to a third party, right? Because I've pulled cards on, like, uh, maybe my kids, or maybe Bruce, or something happening, in our home or our situation, or even like siblings or people like that. But then I'm not delivering the information to a third party like, hey, by the way, so and so is doing this, this, and this. If I've done a reading and I do happen to see a third party, um, I might mention, hey, is there a third party happening that you're aware of, or something? Um, but I'm not going to do a whole reading then on that third party, or on that third party relationship. I don't typically go down that route. It's not really my MO. I more like to focus on you, and what your energy is, and what you need to get through whatever it is you're dealing with at the time, or even to get to whatever is meant for you, um, you know within the energy, within what's happening. um, as Cynthia, sometimes you have specific questions about family members. Yeah, I can see that. You know, that's a fine line for me. It is a very fine line, because sometimes if they wanted you to know, they would tell you. I would hope, right? Like at least that's my thought process. Um, but you know, um, like I said, it's a fine line. You know, uh, if my sister comes to me and asks me if her husband is cheating on her and can I do a reading, I'm probably going to do it because it's my sister. If it's my best friend, I'm probably going to do it because it's my best friend. But I that's not typically where I wander. Usually my question steers more towards, what do you need to know about the situation? What's the information you need to have? And hey, if that Three of Cups card comes up, or that Lover's card comes up, or that Three of Swords comes up, I'm going to say, hey, this is something you maybe want to investigate or look at or watch. But I'm not going to say, I'm not going to ask the question, is Jim Bob cheating on Susie? That's not a question I'm going to ask. I think if you come to me and you say, will my granddaughter get into the special summer camp or whatever, I'm all right with asking that sort of question. But when we delve into like that personal space, I'm really funny. So how exact should a reader be? I think they should be as exact as they can be, which is probably a very vague answer. But I mean, if you have information as a reader, you should share the information. Hey, Jill, thanks for coming in. Rob's not with us today. He's in moving, but I'm here, and we're talking about what we think a good card reader is, and what we think a good reading should be, and maybe the ethics. What will you or will you not do as a reader, or what would you want your reader to do for you? We were just on the subject of swimming in the energy of a third party who isn't aware that you're swimming in that energy. And I was saying, and I don't know how you feel about it, but that's a very fine line, because like I said, like I was saying to them, if it's my sister and she's asking me about maybe somebody she's involved with, I would probably swim in that energy. But if it's a stranger that I don't know, then I likely would phrase the question differently and not really trump around in somebody else's energy. So that's kind of where we're at about ethics. And then Bruce asked, how exact should a reader be? And in my opinion, I think that if you should be as exact as the information that is provided to you to give, right? Card readings. Most of the readers that I know they work on not only on the exact meaning of the card, but they dive into their intuition a lot too, and they sort of mix the two, so they can say, well, this card is here, and in a typical situation it means this, but intuitively I feel like what it's really saying is this, or this. I mean, I don't know. I never contended to be able to predict lotto numbers or stuff like that. I won't tell people, like, and I've never had a situation where where it came up, but I don't think that I'm gonna be like, ooh, girl, you're gonna die in a week or whatever. Like, Jill, would you deliver information like that, or would you say it differently, or what would you do in a situation like that? Would you? Because I'm not all horseshoes and rainbows and unicorns, but at the same time, I don't want to be telling somebody they're going to get hit by a bus on Tuesday either. So I don't know. I'm just curious what everybody thinks about that. I just think we have a responsibility to the people we're reading for. And I think part of that responsibility is not to engage in sensationalism, right? Or to have them leaving your table fearful, uh, terrified that something terrible is going to happen to them or somebody they love or somebody they know. Like, I don't know. Again, I've never really been put in a position where I've had to deliver that kind of information, fortunately, So I don't know if any of you guys have, but I'm not, Yeah, I like the truth too, Cynthia, but I would prefer to not be told, you know, that I'm going to die tomorrow or that I'm going to get cancer or something like that. I feel a lot of times your thoughts become things. And if you plant that seed in somebody's head, you never know what they're going to do with it. You don't know where they're going to take it or how they're going to move with it. And I don't ever want to be responsible or be the cause of somebody, or maybe not the cause, what's the right word? The catalyst for some person's mental break. Like I don't really want, I don't want to carry that responsibility in delivering news like that to somebody and then have them make choices based on that information that maybe are not the best choices. I don't know. I don't know that I could live with myself. I don't drink and drive my car for that reason. I don't, because if I ever hit somebody and killed them, don't think I'd ever be able to live out the rest of my life as like I don't know. I don't know if I could live with myself. But so yeah, I think that kind of information is very sticky. If, for lack of a better term, and so Bruce says, if I knew I was dying in 3 days, I would settle up some debts with no fear of recourse. Well, what if I was incorrect? Or what if I interpreted incorrectly? And what if it wasn't 3 days, but it was 3 years or 3 months or 3 weeks? And you go and settle your debts, and there is recourse, right? Because and so now you've made these decisions based on information that I provided you that, maybe I made a mistake or maybe I interpret it differently. And now you're left holding the bag, or what happens if in that time within your free will, you made a choice that went ahead and shifted the trajectory of whatever that those cards were and put you on a different path where you in fact were no longer in peril, right? And so now you've gone and you've done this ridiculous thing, and now you've got to be accountable for it, maybe face prison time, whatever. Live with yourself and the fact that you inflicted harm on somebody. But I'm not going to be responsible for that, right? Cynthia says her aunt had a lot of readings when she was alive, and they would all get to a certain place in her life and stop. So do you think that they stopped because, so did she fall ill? Did she get sick? Or do you think they stopped because that's when she died? That's when the end of her life was. I've never really, I've done quarterly readings and readings, for 12 months or whatever, but I've never done like, okay, here's what's going to happen over the course of your life, in perpetuity. I've never done that kind of reading, so I can't really speak on it. But so what was the stop then? If it wasn't at the point where she died, whether it was naturally or of an illness, and she didn't get an illness, what was the stop? Or maybe they had to stop because now there's a fork in the road and she has to choose which path to follow, and the path is not defined yet. It's unclear, right? So they're unable to see what the end result is. It could be that too. It could just be, okay, this is a major crossroads. Because I think we all hit these crossroads in our lives, right? We're sitting on the precipice of something, and we can continue down the road that we're on to whatever end that is, or at this point, this is where we have that split, that juncture where you can move in a different direction and change your stars, William, so to speak. I don't know if you guys watch A Knight's Tale, but so maybe that was the stopping point, right? Because she's here, she's going along her path, and then she gets to this point where there's going to have to be life altering choices, right? Life changing choices, and they don't necessarily need to be bad choices, or because you say the phrase life altering and you immediately think something horrible, but it could be something wonderful. You hit the Powerball, you do all this stuff, that and that's a life altering thing, right? So it's likely a good thing, because who doesn't need more money? um so I interesting that they stopped at that certain juncture. I'd be curious why there was that stop, and if it was consistent over several readers, then definitely a significant point in time in your aunt's life, right? I would have to guess it was a moment where she was faced with, making a choice about something, or continuing down the same road, right? Um, so I don't know. That's interesting. Um, Again, I've never really done readings that sort of spanned lifetimes, or a lifetime, age gaps or whatever. What's Cynthia going to be like at 15, and what's going to happen at 25, and what's going to happen at 60, and where's she going to be at 75. I've never really done those types of readings. I've really only, like I said, I've done some quarterlies. I've done like annuals where 12 cards, and one for good luck or whatever. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting. That's an interesting experience. Um I just think I just think a reader reads cards based on their interpretation, and likely their intuition, along with, what they know the textbook meaning to be. And uh you know anything that you do at any given time, you could get a reading, and an hour later decide to do something different, and then it changes the whole outcome of the reading that you got an hour earlier. So now everything you were told may have shifted, or may not play out the way that you think it's going to play out. We all have free will, right? And we do what we do. And when I read cards, I'm looking at the cards that, if you move forward as you are right now, this is what the cards are telling me how things are going to play out. If you keep on the path that you're on right now and move forward in a straight line the same way right now and not deviate, this is what the cards are saying could be an outcome. I don't want to know that far into the future either, Cynthia, to be honest with you. I, I don't I don't want to know that. I don't want to know if I'm going to die, when I'm going to die. If you know, I I want to know if I'm going to hit lotto. Sure, tell me that. But I don't want to know. That at 75 I'm going to get lung cancer, and it's going to be a terrible drawn out illness where I suffer for years. I don't want to know that. I don't know anybody who wants to. Uh, so I mean, a couple of days is great. Yeah, right. Just tell me where I'm going to be on Friday, right? Tell me up through Friday what's going to happen. I hear you. I hear you. You know, I just, I don't know. It actually kind of, um, it's a fine line that you got to walk. I know as a reader, it's very sticky sometimes, and you're kind of walking around. And again, I'm very straightforward, very blunt, and pretty abrupt. So if I find myself waiting in, you know, like pea soup waters, yeah, because I don't want to have to. I don't want to have to be responsible for delivering that information. Plus, I'm not a medical doctor, right? I don't really have any right telling anybody anything like that. I don't even have any medical training to go ahead and deliver that kind of information. But you know, but you know, and then you get those people who constant. They're always like they don't make a move without you reading for them, right? And so, what do you do there? Do you cut them loose? Do you fire them? Um, because as a reader, you like return clients, right? You like people who come back so that you can read for them. But, there are some people, sometimes you get that client who won't tie their shoes without flipping over a card and saying, okay, what should I do here? Or what's going to be the outcome? If should I eat Captain Crunch or should I eat Raisin Bran? I mean, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think you get what I'm saying. And 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 then you get the ones who you've read for and they keep coming back with the same question over and over and over and over again. And it's like, okay, I there's only so many ways I can deliver this message to you. Um, before it gets to the point where it's like, look, I can't do anything more for you. The message isn't changing. Um, so you're either going to have to reach out to somebody else to try and find the information you need, or, give yourself more time. I, I typically, so if we go someplace where readings are prominent, I might get more than one reading, more than likely, um, over time, over the time that I'm in the place. Like in New Orleans, I might get 2 readings, maybe 3 max. It just depends. Um, or like if I go to a psychic fair, I might hit 1 or 2 tables and see what they have to say. Um, but mostly, if I get a reading, I'm due for me personally. If I go to get a reading, they are months apart, months and months, like 3, 4, 6 months, sometimes annually. Like I'll get like around my birthday, I'll usually get like a big, right? But I don't typically like I'm not that one who's every weekend getting a reading, or you know even once a month getting a reading. Like I do, um, yeah. But some people they like that. They like that. I have people who come to me quarterly. Every quarter they want a reading for the next quarter, which I'm okay with, right? Like what do we got coming up? What are we looking at? How are things going? Um, and I think that's okay. How do you guys feel about that? What do you guys think is too much or too little in the way of getting readings? So Bruce says, Do we like those clients? They rely on you, but also give you way too much responsibility. Yeah, because they're not they're not making their own choices with their own brain. They're coming to you to tell them what to do with themselves. And that's where I think, as a reader, you kind of got to draw the line, right? Because it's not my responsibility to drive your bus, right? I mean, I'll come, I'll service your engine, I'll rotate your tires, I'll do all those things. But ultimately, you are the bus driver, right? So it's up to you to drive the bus. It's just my job to give you pointers on how to maintain it, you know. Oh, Robbo's here. I don't know if that's Rob or Gillian. Carol with an attitude. One of y'all is here. Both, both, you know. But hello. Thanks for popping in. We miss you. I'm sure they miss you. They're probably tired of listening to me talk. But you know, hold on. I'm reading through these things. So Cynthia, you get a reading every few weeks and you ask, if there's something new concerning you. Okay, I can do that. But at least you're not saying, hey, what about this situation over and over and over again? Like you said, on the Monday night, those people who ask that same question over and over and over again, right? And at that point, it's like, okay, well, we've answered this question on 4 separate Monday nights, so we're not going to answer this question again. And you've seen Rob say, this question has been asked and answered more than once, and I'm just not going to engage with it anymore. So yes. So Rob thinks I'm spot on. Thank you, Rob. Oh, man. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with that kind of thing, I don't particularly want to fire somebody, but I think I have a moral responsibility to say, look, I just can't help you with this anymore. So maybe you need to find somebody else who's better equipped to help you or who can steer you better, because obviously the advice and the information I'm providing to you is not enough for you to, affect the change that you need to affect. But Robbo, how often do you get readings from people? Do you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to get one like every 90 days, or do you say, at once a year on my birthday or at Christmas, or, do you have a set thing that you do, or do you just say, I feel like I need a reading and get the reading? And I'm not counting the ones where you call me and go, hey, could you just pull a card for me? I'm talking about, you go, you sit down, you pay somebody, and they deliver, 30 minutes or an hour's worth of information. 3 or 4 times a year, sometimes less. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. It just depends. It depends on what's going on. If I have a situation that, that is happening or that is unfolding and I feel like I need a reading, I'll go for a reading then. So Bruce said everyone he knows that reads is too close to him and it impacts the result, which is true. Rob and Bruce, well, especially for me, Bruce would not get, I would not be able to give Bruce an impartial reading. I would always almost inject anything I know about him personally into that reading. I don't like reading family members. Um, Rob and I don't really read each other that much anymore because we are so close that sometimes we're injecting our personal opinions, our personal thoughts into a reading for each other. So any reading we give has to be very like, it can't be super in depth. It's got to be like just flip over some. Here's the question. The question is specific. We flip over the cards. Here's the answer. Here's what I think. Boom, end of story. And that's kind of how our readings. Sorry, my cat is. Can you just give me a minute? Kitty is stuck, wrapped in something. All right, she just got loose. Sorry, guys. She's over there. She was like crying. But yeah. So I don't read for Bruce. I think I tried to do a reading for him once and it did not work out well. I don't know. Rob, have you ever read for Bruce? Bruce, has Rob ever read for you? I don't know that he has. If he has, I've not been present. For me, those are personal, and Bruce doesn't sit when I'm being read. He doesn't sit with me either. We don't sit together and mesh our energies when it comes to readings. It's something we don't do. Oh, so Rob has read for Bruce. Okay, cool. And how did those go? I mean, was it? I guess you're not going to say crappy, right? Because you would never. But I mean, do you think that? Do you think that? Have you had any that you felt like personal opinion um, was being injected into your, you know? Um, and so another question I have is like, so if you feel like you're getting a garbage reading, right, from somebody, um, do you think it's because, you know, do you think it's because they're a bad reader? Do you think it's because maybe it just wasn't time for you to get the information yet? Do you think it's because there's too much like like you're sitting down with too much emotional investment in order for the person to read accurately? You know, what do you think? So Rob says, when you're very close and have a personal relationship, you have to be very careful. That's why I always pray your words, not mine, because it's personal. Exactly. Yeah. And Rob does well, and I know just enough to know if it's good or bad, job, relationship, money, or whatever. He interprets them pretty well and stays fairly removed from personal observation. Yeah, he does good there too. Where I have trouble staying removed from personal observation is like my sister. If I'm reading from my sister, um, a lot of times I have to stop and step back and sort of be like, all right, I can't do this for you today because, you know, I'm emotionally invested, right? I know too much about the situation to be able to give you an impartial overview, like, you know. Um, but I have read from my sister before where I was able to give her information in a way, about things that, and it was not me saying, oh, this is what I think, and it wasn't me giving my personal opinion, my personal investment. It was strictly cards, spirit, intuition. Cynthia says if she's a bad reader, she just smiles and thanks them. Well, but again, were they, the question is, do you think that they were bad because you weren't ready to receive the message yet, so it wasn't coming through? Do you think maybe there was too much emotion involved? Uh, sometimes you just are not connecting with your reader, and that happens. Um, but sometimes you're you just sit down and you think you know better than what's in front of you. So it's a bad reading because they're not telling you what you think they should be telling you, versus what they're telling you and they see in the cards. So sometimes that happens. And I could tell you, like, on those times, like, where I'm getting, like, when I'm off somewhere and I'm getting more than one reading in a very short time period, like within a couple of days. Sometimes you sit down. I always know when I sit down and it's just very vanilla, very bland. All right, well, I've just sat down and asked spirit too many times over this period. And now there's just no real relevant information, nothing that I've already been told for this period of time what I need to know. Now it's just, whatever, yeah, you're fine, everything's good. I think it was because they didn't know what they were doing, not even in the ballpark. Okay. I've had a couple of readings like that where you sit down and you're with somebody, and I didn't have a tarot reading, but I had a mediumship reading where I sat down. It was up in Casadega too. I sat down in front of the lady, and she started talking to me about things that made absolutely no sense, and saying things like about she thought were about my life, and I'm like, no, I've never been to a place like that. I've never done that before. So it was a very long 15 minutes. I paid for 15 minutes. And it was a very long 15 minutes because, after like the first 5 minutes, I was like, all right, well, I think we're just grasping at straws, or we're not making a connection, or she's reading the guy 2 tables over from me or something, because the things that she was saying were just, they had, as far as I know, they had nothing to do with this life that I'm living right now. If they were past lives or maybe upcoming lives or something, she didn't clarify. But the one that I'm living right here today, the information was not for me. I can tell you that. But I did. I smiled. I nodded. I said, but thank you for your time, whatever. Thanks for the reading. Have a good day. I didn't say, oh, you suck. This is bullshit, whatever. I didn't say anything like that. I smiled and nodded. It was a very long 15 minutes. But, it happens like that sometimes. Sometimes you just don't connect. You know what, Cynthia, though? If it was in a past life, then she should have told me it was in a past life. If she could see my past life, she should know that it's a past life. At least in my opinion. If you're reading a past life, then you should clarify, hey, this is coming to me from a past life, because I don't remember that life. So you can't bring things into a reading for me from a life that I don't remember and then expect me to validate them. I'm going to look at you and say, this has nothing to do with me. I have no idea what you're talking about. And I think you might be crazy. So, you know, but that's just me, right? Now, if she said to me, hey, look, I'm seeing a past life and I'm seeing these experiences and things that you're doing and stuff that's happened, I could, yes, I could buy that. I could buy into that very easily. But for you to just come off and say, well, I see you here, or I see this, or I see that, and I'm saying to you, no, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. That's a different reading, at least in my opinion. I don't know how everybody else feels about that. Um, but but anyway, I thought this was a good conversation, from you guys. My cat is wrecking my work desk and she's about to be evicted. I don't know if you can hear all that racket over here, but she's knocking stuff over and she's really being a pest. And, you know, yes, I've had those too, Cynthia, where somebody has said stuff and I'm like, what? And then like a couple of months down the road, I'm like, oh shit, that's what that person meant for. That's what that person was talking about. Yes, I've had those experiences as well. Right. Yeah, I agree with you, Rob. A lot of that, and that's what I was saying earlier before you popped in about like the pomp and circumstance, right? The show, you know, it's not really for them about the reading, it's more about the show that's being put on. Um, I can understand wanting somebody to validate you. I want to give you information and say to you, hey, is this making sense? Is this resonating with you? And I would like for you to say to me yes or no. But I don't, like I said, I don't need to know your life story or anything like that. I just need to know that the information I'm giving you makes sense. Because if it doesn't make sense, then I need to ask different questions or maybe steer in a different direction, right? Um, you know, or if they've got people around them, I need to suss out who is this for. I'm reading for Sally, but the cards are coming across for Susie, right? So that's why I don't like to have people together doing tandem readings, because it meshes the energy. And although I did read a couple once, and it was a great reading, they were really happy with the result of that reading. Um, but anyway, I don't know. I thought it was a good topic to talk about what you think makes a good reading, what makes a good reader, what you look for. I know what I look for, um, and that sort of thing, and how you manage those readings you get where they're just not they're just not quite resonating. They're just not quite it, you know. So hey, it's been an hour. I didn't think I was going to make it the whole hour, guys. So thanks for sticking with me. I was worried that I was going to run out of things to say or stuff to talk about or questions to ask. And so thanks for sticking around with me. I appreciate you taking the time. And hey, have a good week. Hopefully, Rob, are you going to be next week? Or are you still debating Monday doing your show, or is that still up in the air? I think that depends on when you can get your whole setup, right? Uh, what did Rob? Good point, Rob. What point did Rob? Oh, with them. Okay. Oh, my shirt says hello. This is the guy from Barbara. He says hello. Hello. Okay, so he's going to be with me on Wednesday next week. All right, cool. That should be fun. Maybe we'll do some readings since you guys haven't had readings in a couple of weeks. I don't know. We'll talk about it. But anyway, you guys have a great rest of your night. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate you answering my questions and putting up with my commentary. And we will see you next week, Wednesday. Hopefully, we have a good topic, and maybe we'll read, maybe not. We'll see. All right. Have a good night, guys. Bye.